10 p.m., April the 14th, 1865. A man stepped quietly into the back of a crowded theater in Washington, D.C., carrying a small pistol and a knife. Abraham Lincoln. April 14th, 1865. The final 24 hours. 24 hours before the fatal shot, at approximately 10 p.m. on April 13th, 1865, Lincoln was still present in the city of Washington, D.C., deep into what should have been a moment of national relief. The Civil War had ended 5 days earlier, with General Lee's surrender at Appomattox. Flags had returned to full staff. Bonfires had lit the streets in celebration. But Lincoln's final day would not be one of rest. 22 hours before his death, early morning on April 14th, Lincoln rose in the White House in a surprisingly cheerful mood. According to those close to him, it was his happiest day in months. He spoke about the future, even about post-war travel, but the exact content of his early morning schedule remains largely undocumented. By late morning, 11 a.m., Lincoln met with his cabinet, including Ulysses S. Grant, Secretary of War Edwin Stanton, and Secretary of the Navy Gideon Welles. During this cabinet meeting, its minutes partially recorded, the subject was post-war reconstruction. Lincoln made clear he wanted a lenient approach toward the former Confederate states. At least one cabinet member noted his earnestness and clarity. The meeting lasted nearly 2 hours. Around 1 p.m., Lincoln took a short lunch, reportedly a simple meal. There is no clear record of the exact dishes served that day. What followed was a private carriage ride with his wife, Mary Todd Lincoln. Observers recall them speaking softly, perhaps reminiscing. At one point, Lincoln is reported to have held her hand. By 3 p.m., the couple had returned to the White House. Lincoln dealt briefly with a few official matters and signed some routine documents. Names and topics signed that day included government appointments, but no significant executive orders. In surviving fragments of his early evening activities, a visitor from Illinois was received around 4:30 p.m. The nature of the conversation was not recorded in detail. 6 p.m. Lincoln confirmed plans to attend the evening performance of Our American Cousin at Ford's Theater. General Grant had declined to join them, citing travel plans. Other guests were confirmed, Major Henry Rathbone and Clara Harris. Booth, meanwhile, was believed to be planning his attack in another part of the city. At 7 p.m., dinner was served back at the White House. Once again, records are inconsistent as to what was eaten. Witnesses describe it as modest. The Lincolns prepared slowly after that, changing clothing for the theater. By 8 p.m., their carriage moved toward Ford's Theater. Security was limited but not absent. Officer John Parker was assigned as Lincoln's bodyguard for the evening, though his vigilance later came under scrutiny. The streets were calm. The threat seemed long over. At precisely 8:30 p.m., the Lincolns were seated in the presidential box overlooking the stage. They were greeted by applause. The play began shortly after. 9 p.m. The theater was filled. An average performance. Nothing about the moment suggested the gravity of what would follow. Parked horse-drawn carriages and gas lamps flickered outside. Inside the state box, Abraham Lincoln occasionally laughed at the show. 10 p.m. John Wilkes Booth entered the rear of the theater. Booth was a known actor and former performer at Ford's, with personal access to the backstage routes. Using this, he climbed to the passageway behind the state box. Witnesses failed to firmly place him in the building before this time. He carried a single-shot Derringer pistol and a large knife. Several minutes passed. 10:13 p.m. Booth waited for what he believed would be the loudest line in the play, a cue for audience laughter. When it came, he opened the door to the president's box, stepped forward, and fired. The bullet struck Lincoln behind the left ear. He slumped silently, unconscious. Major Rathbone attempted to seize Booth, but was slashed across the arm. Booth jumped from the box to the stage below, breaking his leg in the fall. He shouted something, disputed words, before limping off stage and fleeing out the back door. The theater descended into chaos. Doctors in the audience rushed to Lincoln's side. Among the first was Dr. Charles Leal, a young army surgeon. Lincoln was unresponsive. Leal determined the wound was mortal. A stretcher was found, and Lincoln was carefully moved across the street to the Peterson House, a modest boarding house. Lincoln was placed diagonally across a small bed in the back room of the Peterson House because he was too tall to fit otherwise. He never regained consciousness. Throughout the night, doctors remained at his side. They attempted to reduce pressure in the brain using 19th-century methods: bloodletting, observation, brandy. None would help. Mary Todd Lincoln remained grief-stricken, periodically entering the room then leaving in distress. Secretary Stanton arrived. He questioned witnesses and began coordinating the early investigation in the adjoining room. By 3 a.m., the president's breathing slowed. His pulse weakened. Around him stood cabinet officials, doctors, and close friends. There was no conversation, just the sound of the dying man's labored breaths. Dawn approached. Rain had started to fall gently outside. 7:22 a.m., April 15th. Abraham Lincoln died. Stanton's words, spoken quietly, were later recorded. Now he belongs to the ages. The word of Lincoln's death spread slowly, then rapidly. Telegraph lines carried the announcement to cities across the Union. Bells tolled. The capital plunged into mourning. Booth remained at large for 12 days. He was eventually found hiding in a barn in Virginia. Refusing to surrender, he was shot dead by federal soldiers. His co-conspirators were arrested, tried, and several hanged. Lincoln's funeral procession wound slowly through city after city before his body returned to Springfield, Illinois. He was buried on May 4, 1865. He did not live to see the full consequences of the war he had ended, nor the reconstruction he had begun to shape. But in the final hours of his life, under gaslight, among laughter, as war gave way to peace, he was taken.